today's message title is called The Search. Search. Maybe you would have guessed it if you saw the Instagram post. And obviously that little bit was staged. Kind of to illustrate what we're going to look at today. Now, question, have you all ever lost something that's really important to you? Maybe you lost your wallet, or you lost your iPhone, or something that your bae gave you, or maybe you lost your dignity. Elvin lost his soul. You lost something that was really important to you.
I lost my life.
I think most of us have lost something. I remember one time Jonas lost his wallet after the service, but thank God it was found. Right? But losing something can be a really traumatic experience. Right? You get that sick feeling in your stomach when you realize, oh, something's missing, something is gone. And it can have that, we feel really bad, and we have that sinking feeling that we get. Right? So it can be a very traumatic experience. I think it was this Tuesday night that was a really very strange night for me. Because I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of metal ringing. It was a very high-pitched ding sound, right? And I was wondering in my mind, half awake, still lying in bed, still drowsy, still asleep a bit. What in the world was that sound? What was that sound? What could it be? Because it sounded like a small little metal object had been flung across the room and it landed somewhere, right? A high-pitched thing sound, metallic sound. And so my wonderings was, what could that be? And both my hands were underneath my pillow. And so I thought, wait a minute, metal, small little object, okay. And I use my right hand to feel my left hand to check my ring finger, and my wedding ring was gone.
What? How did it go?
Right? And when I found that it was missing, my first thought was, how in the world did that happen? Right? Wedding rings don't just fall out. And my finger has since gotten a bit chubbier since the time that I was married. And so it's on pretty tight, right? It's very hard for me to actually pull it out. I'm using quite a bit of force to pull it, and it's not coming out here. Right? So I was wondering, how in the world did that happen? How could it possibly happen? It's on pretty tight. And till today, I still haven't figured out how it happened, but it happened. My second thought was, damn, because it's a really small object, and it's circular, meaning it's going to roll, and it can roll anyway. And so I thought, this is really going to take some effort for me to find. And before you ask, I did not wake up, turn on the lights, and search for it immediately for a couple of reasons. Number one, Anne is still asleep, and if I turn on the light, she will kill me. Number two, I'm half asleep, and so I have no motivation to get up from my bed. And number three, I figured, what, the ring is not really lost, right? I mean, it's lost, but it's still somewhere within the confines of my bedroom, and so it's not so bad. It's just somewhere unknown. So I figured I will find it in the morning instead. But I was thinking, right, it's going to take some serious effort for me to find my ring. Right? I might have to bend down and look underneath the bed. I might have to go behind the closets and go and search whether it's there. I might have to take a vacuum cleaner and start vacuuming the whole room to see whether it picks it up. I have to search every nook and cranny to find my wedding ring. And I was thinking to myself, really, if I have to do that, it will be kind of like the woman who lost her coin. That was my thought. Next morning I woke up, found my wedding ring lying right beside the floor next to my bed. And then I found something that I was not looking for, the passage for today. Luke chapter 15. We're reading from verse 8 to 10. Luke 15 verse 8 says, "Or what woman has 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the whole house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she finds it, she calls her woman friends and neighbors together, saying, 'Rejoice with me, because I have found the silver coin I lost.' I tell you, in the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who repents. We're going to break down the passage, talk about it in a moment. But before we do that, you need to realize what's happening first. So in this passage, Jesus is telling a parable, right? And this is the parable that we commonly call the parable of the lost coin. What's a parable?
Story with the
It is a small story with a big truth. In more technical terms, it's a picture story. It's meant to illustrate something about God and His kingdom so that we can understand God's principles and God's truth and then apply it into our daily lives. And so parables really are Jesus' favorite way of teaching. If you read the Gospels, you will find that He tells a lot of stories. He tells a lot of parables as His way of teaching the masses. But what's the circumstance of Jesus telling this story in particular? Right? What's the reason? What's the purpose of Him telling us this story? Now, if you read the earlier part of that section in Luke, you'll find out that Jesus is hanging out with sinners and He's hanging out with tax collectors. Right? Many of them had gathered around Jesus to hear Him speak because Jesus is a pretty cool guy. He is God's Son. He came down from heaven in the form of a human being, but He never really did give off any kind of judgmental, I am more holy than you kind of vibe. Right? He was pretty cool. He was pretty chill. Instead, what He did was that He loved people. He related to them. He accepted them as they are. And as they came to Him, He taught them God's truths and God's principles. He did not change His message so that He'll become popular. Right? But He taught God's truth in a loving manner. And He taught God's truth according to its original meaning, the way that God intended it to be understood. And so the common folks, the tax collectors, the sinners, the prostitutes, the fishermen, the marginalized, they really, really loved Jesus. And they gathered around Him frequently to hear what He had to say. But there's one group of people that did not like Jesus at all. Can you guess who they are? They are the Pharisees, the religious leaders of that day. The guys with big hats and fancy robes and thought that they were the spiritual good guys. They hated Jesus. They did not like Jesus at all. And so on this occasion, they saw all the crowds gathering around Jesus. They got jealous, and so they started saying that this guy, this Jesus guy, he can't possibly be from God. Right? Look at all the kinds of people that he hangs around with. Good, holy people don't mix around with bad characters like that. We're supposed to look down on them and demand that they become like us. And they started to judge Jesus and judge the crowd, saying that they were better than them. Jesus knows what they're talking about, and so He then turns to them and He says, you folks got some serious issues. Right? You guys claim you know God, yet you have absolutely no idea what's important to God. He's telling them that you don't understand the heart of God at all. You have misunderstood God's heart. And so He tells the parable and He says, let me tell you about God's truth. And He tells a series of 3 parables. The first one is the parable of the lost sheep. The second one is the one that we just read, the parable of the lost coin. And then the third is the parable of the lost son. All of these parables were meant to illustrate God's heart for the lost. And spoiler alert, His heart is not to condemn people. His heart really is to search for the lost so that the lost can be found. And that's really important for us because sometimes we also misunderstand God's heart. And sometimes we end up acting more like the Pharisees than acting like Jesus. And that would be a grave mistake for any of us to make. So we need to understand God's heart. And while we can't cover all 3 of the parables, we're going to look at the middle one that we just read. And we're going to look at 3 truths about God's heart for the lost. In the beginning, our reading with Luke chapter 15, verse 8. Jesus says, what woman who has 10 silver coins if she loses 1 coin? Just 1 coin. If she loses 1 single coin. The scholars endlessly debate why in the world this woman would search so hard for 1 single coin. So there are a few ideas. Some of them will say that the coin is really only worth a few dollars. And there's one particular scholar that says it's worth exactly $1.60. I have no idea how he came up with that figure, but he calculated and he says it's worth $1.60. But she's really poor. And so that $1.60 means a lot to her, and so she searches very hard to find that $1.60. That's one theory. The other theory is that, the coin is worth about 1 day's wage. So in today's term, it's worth a couple of $100s, depending on your job. And so of course she would search very hard. If you lost $200, $300, you would also be searching quite hard to find that amount of money, right? And so that's why she searched so hard. Still, other people, they think that the coin is not an ordinary coin. This is a special coin that her father gave to her when she got married. And so it's part of the marriage ceremony, it's part of the dowry, and so she keeps it because it has special significance to her. That's why it's so precious to her. So there's all sorts of theories about why this woman searches so hard for that coin. I think it does not matter which interpretation is correct, because that's not the point of the story at all. What's the point of this story? The point of the story is that no matter what that coin is, or no matter how much that coin is actually worth, it's valuable enough for this woman to spend an effort to search for that coin. Meaning, you only care about what is lost if it's important to you. You only care about what is lost if it's important to you. I doubt if you lost 10-cent coin on your way over to here, that you will launch a massive search party to find that 10-cent coin. Right? Some of you drop 10-cent coins and you debate within yourself whether you should even bend down to take it back up, because it's so unimportant to you. It's 10 cents. But if you dropped your iPhone on your way here and you realize it's missing, well, you might search a bit harder. Right? That's when you pray harder than you ever prayed for in your life, and you pray that you've turned on the Track My iPhone feature, because it's precious to you, it's important to you, and so you are going to take the effort to find it. And there was one time I was attending my grandmother's wake. My grandmother's wake was at Mount Burton, I think, and it was in the evening, and we were going to have our dinner first. Well, we had our dinner first at a coffee shop near our place in Ang Mo Kio, and then we made our way across to Mount Burton. But once I reached Mount Burton, I realized something. I realized that my bag was missing, and I had a ton of important work documents in that bag. Right? That was a terrible moment of my heart sinking. And so, even though it's a very long distance back to travel from Mount Burton back to Ang Mo Kio, and it's my grandmother's wake that I'm supposed to attend, I figured, never mind, she's dead, she knows Jesus, she's already in heaven, this is not a problem. And if I don't find my bag, my boss is going to make sure that I join her. So I need to travel back and get my bag because it's important to me. And so even though it's a long distance, it took a lot of effort, and I had to shave off some time that I'm supposed to be at the wake. I went back to get my bag, to search for my bag at the coffee shop. And thank God that nobody took it, and so I got that bag back. Why did I spend all that effort? Because it is important to me, right? It has some kind of meaning. And that's what Jesus is trying to say here. He's saying, what's important to God? That God is a God who cares for the lost. He cares for the lost. That's the point. The point of Jesus telling us that this woman is so concerned about a lost coin is to tell us that God's heart is exactly the same way, that He cares about the lost. What does it mean to be lost? What does it mean to be lost?
Don't know the way.
Be separated from God.
If we don't get too religious with our definitions, it simply means to be removed from the one that you belong to.
Oh.
So if a child wanders away from his or her parents, he or she is lost. Right? If your cat goes off exploring by itself and does not come back, it is a lost cat. If you are separated from your laptop is lost. If you play PUBG and your teammate wanders away from the team and encounters another team that he or she does not belong to, that is a lost teammate. You're lost when you're removed from the one that you belong to. And really, we need to know that the default state of man is to be lost. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1 to 3, Paul writes and he says, once you were dead because of your disobedience and your many sins, you used to live in sin just like the rest of the world, obeying the devil, the commander of the powers of the unseen world. He is the spirit at work in the hearts of those who refuse to obey God. All of us used to live that way, following the passionate desires and inclinations of our sinful nature. Right? Lost is the default state of all mankind because God created us for a relationship with Him, and it's really only in relationship with Him that we experience what life is all about. But we decided that we know better, and we decided that we should make our own way and live lives our own means. And so we rejected God, we broke His commandments, and we sinned against Him. Sin really is what separates us from God. And we all have sin in our life. Romans chapter 3 verse 23 says, for all have sinned, fallen short of the glory of God. You all know by now that sin isn't just what you do, it's also what you don't do. Right? You sin when you lie, or you cheat, or you steal, or you hate people, or you gossip. All that is sin. But sin is also when you could have helped, but you did not help. You could have been generous, but you did not show generosity. You could have shown respect, but you did not show respect. That is also sin. So sin is what you do, and sin is what you do not do. And we all have sin in our own way, and so we are all lost. And our sin causes us to experience the justice of God instead of experiencing the grace and mercy of God. And so God really, He would be entirely just if He were to punish all of us for our sins and everything that we have done wrong, because we are guilty. But that's not God's heart. God's heart is mercy and not judgment. Ezekiel chapter 18 verse 23, the prophet writes, do you think that I like to see wicked people die, says the sovereign Lord? Of course not. I want them to turn from their wicked ways and live. See, God's heart is that what is lost might be found, so that they would come back to Him and experience the abundant life that only He can give. And I was thinking about this and about the coin. You realize that the coin has no real value or purpose if it is lost and it remains lost. A coin that is lost is only a slab of metal on the ground. It can't achieve anything. It has no real value if it's lost. The only time that it has value is that it belongs to somebody. Only in the hands of the ones that it belongs can it then be exchanged and fulfill its purpose. And we are exactly the same way. Only when we live life with Jesus according to His principles and His priorities in terms of our studies and our work and our family and even our rest time, only then does life become meaningful, and only then can we be fulfilled. And that's what God wants to give you. He wants to give it to you because He cares about you, and He knows that without Him you are by definition lost. So here's what we need to know. That if we are lost and we have somehow wandered away from God, you need to know that God cares about you. Right? God cares about you. Regardless of what you've done, regardless of how far you have gone, God still cares about you because He loves you. And really His love is what compels Him to do what we see next in Luke chapter 15. Verse 8, the story continues. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? Secondly, God searches for the lost. Now, back in those days, the average household is not the same as our HDB houses, right? They didn't really have lights. There's no electricity at that point of time. They didn't have big windows either. What they had was like tiny little slits that would let some light through, but not a lot of light. And so the houses were pretty dark. They also did not have flooring like us. I don't know how you imagine an ancient house to be like. Maybe you imagine there's like carpet, this blue carpet that's here. But really they had none of that. They had mud flooring. Maybe some straw on top of that mud flooring. And so this is really not ideal conditions to find something that is lost. Because then it's dark, and because mud can cover anything, and it might get lost in the straw that's on the floor. But we find that this does not stop the woman at all. That she is completely determined to find what she has lost. And she's not going to let darkness stop her. She lights a lamp. And she's not going to let messy floors stop her. She's going to sweep the entire place so that she can find what is lost. And so she spares absolutely no effort, and she keeps on searching until she finds a lost coin. And what Jesus is saying is that God is like that. That God's love compels him to reach out to find for the lost. If you wandered away from God in some way in your life, you need to know that God loves you too much to let you remain the same. Now, this is what sets Christianity apart from all other religions on earth. In every other religion, you have to search for God, right? And so you have to gain enlightenment, or you have to do good deeds so that it outweighs your bad deeds, or you have to reincarnate and pay off your karmic debt, or you have to go to a holy place every single year, or you have to eat some kind of food only and restrict your diet. You have to do something to search for God, and only then can you be approved by God. Christianity is the only one that's different. It's the only faith where God comes and searches for you because he loves you. And God came down to search for us. He reached out to us first. And we find that today God is still in the business of finding lost people. Some of you come on Sundays, and so you know that recently we have a new family that has joined us, Rick and Ping and their two little children. Anne and I first met them when we were about 15 years old, right? And so we used to go to the youth group together. But then life happened, and they wandered away from God. They left the church. We don't really know what happened to them for about 15 years. And it was the longest time that we had lost contact until recently, one night, Rick had a dream. And in his dream, he dreamt that Jesus appeared to him, and Jesus said to him, "You need to come back to church. You need to come back to church." And so if you had that dream, you are going to come back to church, right? So he woke up, he got shocked, and he told his wife, "We need to get back to church. Jesus just appeared in my dream and he says we need to go back to church." And so that's a startling thing for him. And they started to search for a church to attend. Cut a long story short, through a mutual friend, they managed to get reconnected back to Anne and myself. And here they are today. And the reason they're here today is because Jesus is still in the business of finding lost people. You can't wander away. You can be lost. But God is not going to let you go just like that. He is going to search for you, and He is going to want to find you. Because that's what God does. Most of us, we're here today because God searched for us. Maybe God didn't search for you through such a dramatic way, such as a supernatural dream. But maybe He searched for you through a friend who just kept pestering you and telling you about Jesus. And that's the way that Anne came to the church. Right? Her best friend at the time kept pestering her over and over again, relentlessly. "Come to church with me, come to church with me, come to church with me." And she's quite hard-headed, so she denied and rejected her friend for the longest time, until one day she had a big problem in her life, and then she decided to come to church. And God found her. God found Raymond by causing him to go to a camp that he was not supposed to go to. God found Eugenia through tuition, of all things. These are not coincidences. These are divine intervention. And God is the one that is working behind the scenes. You did not find God. God found you. He's the one that searches. He's just like this woman who does everything that she can so that she can find a lost coin. And God has done the same. He has done everything that He can do so that the lost can be found. The greatest display of this is, of course, through Jesus Christ. Luke chapter 19, verse 10, Jesus Himself says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." John chapter 3, verse 17 says, "God sent His Son into the world, not to judge the world, but to save the world through Him." Paul writes in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, "This is a trustworthy saying, and everyone should accept it." Everyone means you and me. We should all accept this. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, and I am the worst of them all. That's what Paul says of Himself. God came to save. God came to seek and save. How much does God want the lost found? Enough for Him to send His own Son, pay the price for our sins on the cross so that the lost can be found. God has done everything that needs to be done so that He could offer salvation to us as a free gift. And the only thing that anyone needs to do is to believe in Him, to place their faith in Him, to trust in Him. Because God is the one who is searching, and God is the one who wants the lost to be found. And so He has done everything that He can do. And all that's required of us and anyone is simply to believe. Earlier this year, Dell asked me a question because a friend of hers asked her a spiritual question and she didn't really know how to answer. And so she was having a conversation with a friend, and a friend then asked her, "Why should I become a Christian? Why should I be a Christian? I look at some of the Christian people's lives and they are not any better than mine. Right? In fact, some of them are worse. So why should I become a Christian?" That's a good question to ask. It's a fair question. My reply was, being a Christian is not really about claiming to be any better. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Being a Christian means that we realize that we are sinners. It means we realize that we are all broken, we're all dysfunctional in some way. And so we are helpless and powerless to change ourselves, and we need God to change us. So what it means to be Christian simply means to be someone who is lost, but is then found by God because of God's grace and God's mercy given through Jesus Christ. That's what it means to be Christian. It's not to mean to be more holy than someone else. It is to be forgiven, to receive grace and mercy from God, because God is the one who came down to search for us. So no need to get on a moral high horse, right? We are all sinners. We are all saved by grace. God is the one who came to seek and find and save. Which is why the next point should not then come to us as a surprise. Luke chapter 15, verse 9 to 10. When she finds it, she calls her friends, or woman friends, I don't know why so specifically woman friends, but she calls her woman friends, her neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me because I have found the silver coin I lost. And I tell you, in the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who repents." Read verse 10 really carefully. Read verse 10 really carefully. Because the verse does not say the angels rejoice over a sinner that repents. It does not say heaven rejoices, or all of heaven rejoices because one sinner repents. The angels probably couldn't care less whether you repented or not. In fact, they don't even seem to understand what's the fuss all about us, that God would spend so much effort on us, right? They're just busy in heaven doing their heavenly duties, worshiping God day and night. That's their job. They couldn't care much about us. If you read what Jesus says in verse 10, he says there is joy in the presence of God's angels. So let's get a little demonstration. I need some angels. Let's have a bunch of angels. Okay, you three can become angels. Please stand. Please stand up. We have our angels.
We don't look very angelic.
And then we have someone else in the presence of all these angels. That's the thing. She will be our someone else. And so she can come over here. And so, in the presence of these angels, there is rejoicing. Please rejoice. Not you. Right? This is terrible rejoicing. Right? But there is rejoicing. Rejoice. Something. Shake your hands. Something. Right? There is rejoicing in the presence of the angels. That's what the verse is saying, and that's what Jesus is saying. So the question, thank you can all sit down now. The question is, if the angels are not the one rejoicing in heaven, who is the one rejoicing?
God. That was you.
God rejoices when the lost is found. This woman, she's extremely happy that she found a lost coin. Right? And she tells all her friends, she tells all her neighbors, she puts it on an Insta story, she throws a big party, and she's overjoyed because the lost coin is found. And Jesus tells us God is like that. That is God's heart. He's overjoyed and he rejoices. He throws a party when someone says, I believe in Jesus. He throws a party when someone comes back to him. He throws a party and he celebrates when someone gets baptized. And he's overjoyed. And some of us, we have the wrong idea about God. We think of God as someone who's far away and impersonal. He's like a judge in a court, or he's like a strict discipline master in school. And he's just stern and uncaring, and he's just waiting to let us have it the moment that we screw up and we mess up. And Jesus says, that's not God at all. Right? If you have that image of God, then you've got it all wrong. And some of the reason, or one reason that some of you might be running away from God is because you have that idea of God and you think that He just wants to catch you and He wants to punish you. But God is not like that. And Jesus tells us that's not God's heart at all. Right? He is the judge, and He will judge all our sins. But really, God's heart is a Father's heart. He's not a God who is impersonal. He's someone who's personal. He's not a God who is distant. He's a God who's close. He's not a God who is uncaring. He's a God who is always deeply concerned about everyone. God is a loving Father, and He is overjoyed the moment one of His lost children comes back to Him, and He celebrates. So here's what you need to know. You need to know that you are wanted. That God wants you. He does not need you, but He wants you because He loves you. And that's the whole purpose that He created you in the first place, so that He could know you and you could know Him. And together you could have a relationship with your God. Because He created you as His precious, precious children. And He wants His children to be found. This entire message is all about the search, specifically God's search to find what has been lost. So if you wandered away from God in your life in some way, shape, or form, and you find that you think that you are somehow lost, then you need to know that God cares about you. He's looking for you. And so turn to Him. Don't just run away. Because God has given you an invitation to come back and be in relationship with Him because He loves you. And that's a decision that only you can make for yourself. But if you believe in Jesus, And I think most of you do. And you are in relationship with Him. And I pray as we've gone through this message together that you remember just how much God loves you. You remember all the things that He has done for you and how much He treasures you, and you are His precious possession. You are His child, and God rejoices in relationship with you. You have His love. You have His acceptance. You have His delight. You have His approval because you are in Christ. And so if you're God's child, God rejoices over you. And as much as He loves you, He also loves the people that are around you. So please know the truth. Share God's heart. And let Him work in and through your life so that He can seek and save